but much as I enjoyed mining, I really did enjoy working down the pits. I worked down the pits in Kent and in the South Notts coalfield. I just knew it wasn't me for the whole of my life. So by chance, there was a computer generated by in those days, they didn't have computers. We didn't have a laptops and things like that. But at the University of Nottingham, they had a huge room with one huge computer in it, which served the whole of the campus. And they decided to do some careers advice. I put my details in, and they said, well, you shouldn't do mining. You should either go into stage management or studio management. So I said, well, stage management, you want to be an actor. And then they said, well, why don't you just wait for the BBC? They're coming around and got the interview.
Right. So it was the computer that got you the job in the end then, that set you on that direction?
Yes. The Atlas computer, which was pioneered by Ada Lovelace in the which century? Anyway, yes, it was a computer, not me. And I was delighted. I couldn't believe it when I walked through the doors at Broadcasting House.
Wow. So, I mean, I know you were involved a lot in sports announcements initially. I think when we were talking about it before, you said you were sort of channeled into that. But you also got involved an awful lot in music at the BBC. And I've done a bit of research. So tell me about Bran Tub, because I believe that was a children's music programme.
Bran Tub was a children's music programme, indeed. And it was I had no intention of appearing in front of a microphone. No intention at all. I was able to work behind the scenes. But when I joined Radio Nottingham from Broadcasting House in London, came up to Nottingham because Radio Nottingham was just starting, they said, you'll have to do stuff in front of a microphone, do announcements. I was terrified. Honestly, I was shaking. A bit like I'm shaking now doing this. And they said, you've got to also do a children's request programme. It was all done by women in those days, and they weren't very keen on me doing it. But I had Squeg the squirrel and Syrup the lamb. Squeg was sort of squeak. So I used to say, and who's in the Bran Tub today, Squeg? And he'd do a squeak. And he'd go in the Bran Tub and do a few more squeaks, and because he didn't exist really. And this is a surprise. And he'd bring out a request. So it would seem like, oh, Rupert the Bear, that's a delight. Let's play Rupert the Bear for Albert Sidgley, who lives in wherever it was.
It's interesting that you said that it was mainly women doing it at that time.
Yeah.
That seems quite strange, because we think of like kind of probably 50 years ago as being a time when women were only just breaking into these kinds of roles.
I guess they were. It would be pretty fresh. Yes, it would. I mean, men took on.
Can you repeat that, John? We just lost you.
But the main people at Radio Nottingham were men, but certainly the women was being trained up, if you like. And this is a training ground for presenters, the children's programme.
And I know from Bran Tub, I mean, I shouldn't think it got you straight into it, but you then went on to doing Extravaganza, didn't you? The rock show. Yeah, it turned out
they really employed me because of my interest in music and sport. And so when they found out I was music, I started setting up. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, you keep breaking in and out. Try again.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Try again, John.
I can see you now. You can hear me again.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. They were interested in me doing music and with sport. And with the music side, I was very interested in rock music because that was the stuff nowadays, in those days. And so we set up a rock program on a Saturday morning. Can you imagine doing a rock show on a local radio station on a Saturday morning? And the result was unbelievable, great success.
It must have been really groundbreaking.
Sorry, I've lost you.
It must have been really groundbreaking.
It was. It was because people still come up to me now and say, oh my goodness, you set me on the path of listening to music. And it was just a wonderful moment, and we've never ever forgotten it. I used to do rock shows as well, and yes, people still come up to me and talk about it. So it was groundbreaking, but also had a good listenership. And it was up against Noel Lebanon's Multicoloured Swap Shop and up against Tiswas as well.
Oh goodness, they're both shows I remember. I'm afraid I was a TV girl then, not a radio girl at that time. But I know that kind of you moved on to doing television, didn't you? Because you did Look Here, and again, pretty groundbreaking at the time. What was it that made you feel that you had to take the kind of popular culture from the radio to local television?
What happened was they decided to set up a youth programme. In those days, regional television had 2 half-hour opt-outs a week. 2. I've even got 1 now, a proper one. And unless you include the politics show. And they needed to fill it with stuff from across the region. And because in those days in Birmingham, they were covering Nottingham as well, they decided they needed a Nottingham or East Midlands presence. And so they asked for someone who did rock music in the East Midlands. And obviously I was the right person. And we used to cover film reviews, theatre reviews, but I was mainly interested in the music. And we had lots of live bands on as well.
I know. I was talking to you before, wasn't I, about, Toya was the one of the presenters. I was a bit of a fangirl.
Yeah, Toya had been in Oh, she was lovely. She was in a film called Jubilee, which was a sort of punk movie, they used to call it. And she came, our producer, Roger Castles, who then went on to do the Clothes show. He's a very talented guy. Saw her in Jubilee and said, we've got to get her in as a presenter. So it was me and Toya and also a guy called Chris Phipps. And our job was to hold the programme together. And we were just lucky. When Toya joined us, it was when Two-Tone had just broken. So we had an Unknown Specials AKO, we had the Selector on. I auditioned Texas Midnight Runners, believe it or not, and UB40 and people like that. It was just staggeringly good. Yeah.
So of the two then, having done local radio in the BBC and having done sort of local television programmes as well, which do you prefer? Do you prefer being behind the microphone or in front of the camera?
Unfair question. I prefer. I love being in front of, because of my ego. I love being in front of the television camera.
Right. That's very honest.
Sometimes television cameras can love you or hate you, and it really is true. I know some very good-looking blokes who come over looking like something out of a Hammer horror when they're on telly. Fortunately, the camera liked me. I wouldn't say I wasn't. I'm not saying I wasn't a Hammer horror, but the camera liked me, and I liked the camera. So I had a good affair with the camera, if you like.
Because I know you wrote a lot of shows, didn't you, for Pebble Mill? Was it the?
Yeah, well, I presented a lot of shows for Pebble Mill, yes.
But you were one of them particularly, I can't remember what the name of the programme was, where you did the walks around the Midlands. What was that?
That was much more that was more recently. I was on East Midlands Today. They asked me as a presenter at Radio Nottingham at the time, would you do a film about your hobby for us? Just a short 1.5 minute piece. And I said, well, my hobby is walking or brewing beer. And they said, what would do with the beer? I said, no, you're not coming in my garage and watching me brewing beer. That's boring. And as for walking, what am I going to do? I walk down this road and say, this is a pretty road. This is a lovely stream. Look at that tree. But then it suddenly occurred to me, there was a lot of history I could do. So what I would do was devise walks, circular walks in East Midlands. That's Leicester, Derby and Nottingham. And tell the history of the area and the people. And it would rent down. We did 8 series. So I did between 13, 40 walks for the BBC. Loved it, absolutely loved it. Wow. I wrote them and looked at the camera positions. And then I got a director, Tony Bunn, to actually put it together.
Wow. And so was that ever made into a publication at all, if you'd already written the walks?
No. Rather foolishly, it sounds like fire alarms going off here. Rather foolishly, I've got all the notes, but I've never ever turned them into a book. this book was such a big project, writing my own, the book, 50 Years at the BBC. I decided that I couldn't face another one yet.
So, the fire alarm has stopped in the background. Excellent. So you're not going to have to evacuate just yet.
Yeah, that's really weird. No, it hasn't. No, I don't know what it's all about. I must have touched something. Okay. Can you hear me still all right?
we can still hear you, yes. Yeah.
Yes, okay. Carry on anyway.
Okay, well, I was thinking you've been involved in the BBC for, half of its existence, really. And I know we spoke briefly about the kind of significant moments in the BBC, that they've been involved in. So are there any significant moments that either you were involved in or that you wish you'd been involved in?
Yes, one of the places, I was listening to a documentary on Tomorrow's World. I auditioned for Tomorrow's World, and I'd love to have been involved in that programme. I auditioned for it at Kensington House. Didn't get it, was also Prue, I don't know what the next thing. I was a runner-up, and then as a result of that, I got a consumer series called Inside Information, which went out on BBC Two. So it was the very first consumer series, full-time consumer series, not Watchdog, on the BBC. So I was very, very pleased to do that. And we wore sweaters. Frank Boff used to say we were the first to wear sweaters on the breakfast show, but it was Stuart MacDonald was the director on our show and on the breakfast show, and we wore sweaters before Frank Boff did.
So even John Craven might have nicked his sweater idea from you then.
Well, yeah, quite well. I don't know. It's a good question. I've no idea, but that was my claim to fame. You say, what groundbreaking moments was I at? There was one when Mrs. Thatcher banned terrorists being heard on the radio and on the television, and actors had to mouth what they were saying. Do you remember that?
Yes, I remember that time.
Yeah. Well, the week came in happened to be the week I was producing Any Questions in Northern Ireland. And the week before in Kidderminster in the car park with Jonathan Dimbleby and Carol Stone, who was the main producer, and Ian St John of Fawsley was with us as well. We stood in the car park and we said, look, the BBC is refusing to let us go to Northern Ireland. We've been invited there. We invited there 6 months ago. It is not antagonising Mrs. Thatcher, and that's not the reason. We're going to stand firm, and if they don't let us do it, we'll go on strike. And the thought of actually Any Questions going on strike, in the end, after a long battle, forced them to let us go to Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland weren't best pleased, but as it turned out a treat. It was a great programme. Yeah, very, very nerve-wracking, but it was one hell of a programme to produce with terrorists, potential terrorists outside, and the army. The army was outside the village hall, waiting to pounce if anything went wrong. So that was good fun. And the other turning point was when Michael Green, who's the controller of Radio 4, we were having a sort of drinks or meal with him. And he said, I've got an idea. I'm going to move Woman's Hour, to which there was a sharp intake of breath because it was sacred. Woman's Hour in the afternoon was sacred. He said, because if we don't move it, we're going to lose the drama, because the drama must go out at the same time as Women's Hour goes out at the moment, between 2 and 3, because between 3 and 4, when the drama went out, to get complicated. Between 3 and 4, when the drama goes out, people are picking up children from school and they're not listening to the radio. So we suggested moving Women's Hour to the morning. Now, when I went into the Women's Hour studio, they were absolutely vitriolic. They were up in arms. And I kept saying to them, well, it'll work because you get a bigger audience. Don't you see? It'll work. Oh, no one moves Women's Hour. And there was a big there was a lot of stuff in the press, wasn't there, about it being moved. But it was moved, and successfully moved, I'm proud to say, although I was only a small cog in that move.
Yeah. We've had a question in actually on the chat saying, how much of your career do you think was actually a result of being in the right place at the right time?
That's a very good question. Some of it was being in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Oh, really?
Well, a lot of my ideas were ahead of time, if you like. I like to think of that. And therefore I missed the boat. And then 3 years later, someone comes up and does it, as a full-blown series. I mean, I wrote. I've never written anything as good as Horrible Histories, but I did write. I was doing a history because I'd worked underground, and my first one was sewage, and it was just like Horrible. I'd written it. I've still got the script, like Horrible Histories before Horrible Histories, and Central Television turned it down because they wouldn't let me present. They had to get somebody else to present, and I said, in that case, you're not doing it. I shot myself in the foot many times. But yes, it is lucky.
The material was good, but they wanted to put their own face to it.
Yeah, that's right. Which happens a lot. But it's right. What you have to learn to do, and I suppose it's in any job, is when an opportunity rears its head, you grab it. And when I didn't grab it, I fell foul. I wanted to be a children's presenter, and I was given a break in Manchester, and because I was working elsewhere for regional television, I turned it down. I said, I can't turn up on that day, and Mark Curry got the gig in the end. So
So there's a few things that you wish you had sort of done that were kind of their moment. I mean, you seem to be involved in so many things. I mean, the local radio, when we spoke before, you were saying how local radio you were involved right from the start, pretty much. I mean, how important is it, local radio? How important do you think it is?
Well, when I joined, it was only just beginning to become important. The funding had changed. The funding had changed to being totally the BBC. That's how why I was recruited to go there. Because in the old days, very old days, local council chipped in half the money. That's how they chose where the first stations are going to be. I'm just going to move away from this chap who's talking a bit loud. When I joined, we were only on Rediffusion Channel C it was, and
we've just lost you.
On VHF. No one had VHF. Have you? Oh goodness! I'll go back in where that man's talking. Can you hear me all right now? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me now? Yeah.
Yes, you can hear me now.
It's a disaster as far as. Anyway.
No, you're fine. We're hearing you.
Okay, great. So when I joined, there wasn't many listeners, but then when they moved over to medium wave, it changed it totally. And it became enormous. I mean, on a Sunday programme, which Dennis McCarthy used to present on Radio Nottingham, the phones used to jam, and the post office was in trouble because they couldn't cope with the number of calls. So it became an enormous success, and it also brought communities together. And we had it was a heyday, and then commercial radio came along and blew a hole in it really, because lots of people, they just wanted this sort of new whiz, way of presenting and music, which I could quite understand. But it meant that we'd lost half our audience, and that sort of didn't help too much. We then built it up again, and it was highly successful. It's been highly successful most of its life, actually. It's an important cog in the BBC's wheel, and I just wish they weren't doing what they're doing now.
Yeah, I was going to say there are some changes afoot, aren't there, in local radio?
Yeah.
I mean, when we spoke about it before, you were saying about the importance, what you felt was the importance of local radio to communities. So do you want to share a bit of that?
Well, it's even more important now. It should be more important because the local papers aren't covering it. I mean, like the Post and the Derby Telegraph, they're owned by Reach PLC, and they're all Reach PLC, and understandably, they're business people for the money. Therefore, Nottingham hasn't even got its own office now. The once huge Nottingham Evening Post with hundreds of thousands of readers has gone, really.
Yeah.
It's really sad. Oh my goodness, now what's that? Oh no.
We've got organ playing in the background. There you go. Who expected to have a literary festival with music as well? You're getting a bit of everything if you're logging in today.
Can you still hear me?
I can, yes.
Yeah, that's the English Spring. It's in the Museum of Making. And
right.
I didn't know it worked. They put a pound in, and it makes this noise. I found a nice quiet room, I thought. Yeah.
No worries. I I know we mentioned your love of music and the music programs that you've been involved in. And I know that you have a huge personal
music
of records, and you've seen a bit of a resurgence because you've set up a pint of vinyl, haven't you?
Yeah, it's really weird. People, I kept my vinyl collection. Lots of people got rid of them and said, "Oh, I've got it all on iTunes or online or something." But of course, the quality is not the same. And sometimes it's better, but on the whole, it's not the same. And there's nothing to handle. You know, if you go into, say, a pub where they're playing some music, you say, "What's that piece of music?" They don't know. In the old days, they just get the record out and show you. And that's, people like handling the covers. And it's coming back, and it's young people. That's the other thing I find quite funny. That when I do these vinyl evenings in Nottingham, it's mainly young people, young to me, 40 and under, who turn up with their own records, their own vinyl. It's brilliant.
So, I mean, in kind of radio now, then, presumably all the music is digital. They don't have kind of those libraries of records that they're manhandling anymore.
You don't need them, no. There's a library there's a computer library in Birmingham, computer library in London, and if one goes down, the other one can be used. So that's it. It's really sad. It's not the same.
No, I must admit, I've got a collection of CDs, and my son, who's a musician, sort of says, "Oh, you want to stream all your music?" And I was like, "No, I like my physical records. I like hearing my album in the right order."
Yeah.
A bit.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, exactly. Weird. There was a lot of work went into those albums. Yeah, a lot of work went into those albums to put them in the right order, and then people just sort of just select and then don't hear the rest of it. It's very sad, you know.
Yes.
Because some albums hang together so much better. Yeah. Go on,
well, I know one of the questions I had for you as well about your time with the BBC, and it seems quite apt today in light of the tech problems that we've had. Was whether you'd had any.
I hate Zoom. Yeah, go on.
Whether you'd had any problems with broadcasts and things over the years. Is there anything that stands out for you as a problem that you had either on TV or radio?
This isn't the problem you're probably after. I don't know what it is, but when I was presenting Look Here, first of all, I used to present it in Nottingham in what we called the broom cupboard, and they had these sumptuous Pebble Mill studios, and so they'd go, over to Nottingham, and there's John in the broom cupboard, whereas they were in a lovely studio with the bands. So one day there was a blizzard. One Friday night there was a blizzard. It was bad. And as a result, the line went down between Nottingham and Birmingham. And this was about 3 hours before we had our transmission. So they said to me, "We're going to abort it unless you can get to Pebble Mill." Well, there was a blizzard on. And so they assumed I'd say, "No, I wouldn't do it." I said,
"We've just lost you again." Johnny, you still there? Can you hear me still?
About half an hour to spare. Parked up outside Pebble Mill, went up into the studios and said, "I'm here." I could see them all looking, "Oh God, no, we didn't think he'd turn up." So they had to rejig all the camera positions, which they weren't very pleased. Instead of saying, "Oh, well done, John," it was just, "Joe, just go in the bar and have a drink, for goodness sake." So I went in the bar and had a drink. And then they said, "John Holmes to makeup." Well, I'd never worn makeup before. I just thought it was a joke. So I ignored it. And then I was then shouted at, "John Holmes, will you please come to makeup now?" So I had to wear makeup. So I'm not used to wearing makeup. I never used to wear it in Nottingham. Why should I wear it in Birmingham? But that was one where the technical problems were terrible. And obviously you get things which go wrong. You just have to, I just like busking it. I tell you what, one thing that went when we thought had gone wrong, and that was I was at Derby and there was a lightning strike and it knocked all the equipment off the air.
Oh no!
Except the microphones.
Oh crikey!
So if you haven't got the presence of mind. Unfortunately, by then I was experienced enough to have the presence of mind to realise you do not panic in front of a microphone, live mic. I carried on just talking. Now, some people may have said, "Oh dear," or whatever they might have said,
yes,
or "Can you hear me?" and all this stuff like I'm doing just now. I just carried on talking, and it kept the transmitter going, because you have to keep talking to keep the transmitter going. And then they got a generator going, and it all came back on. But everything went off. Everything.
Wow.
There was no CDs to play. It's very, very frightening, actually.
Yeah, just talking to an unseen audience kind of thing, and hoping that they're
of course, the audience is always unseen on the radio, well, most of the time, so that's not so hard. And I'm used to talking to myself anyway, like I'm doing it now. No, I'm talking to you.
You are talking to me, and to everybody who's listening in as well. I'm
so sorry you can't see me.
I know, it's such a shame,
but
we're still getting all the good stuff out of it, out of this chat.
I hope so. Yeah.
Yeah. It's lovely to hear all your memories and your involvement with the BBC. I mean, one thing, you must have seen so many programmes over the years, and the BBC are quite famous for their various flagship programmes, like Saturday Night Strictly, and things like Children in Need, the dramas like EastEnders. Is there any particular flagship programme that you would have wanted to have been involved in?
I always wanted to present Jukebox Jury. Not Jukebox Jury. I'd like to have done that. I wanted to Top of the Pops.
Oh, yes.
I was doing Look Here. I'd love to have done Top of the Pops.
Yeah.
But it was not to be. I was shortlisted for Radio 1, but never got the gig. So Simon Mayo got it instead. So Simon's Game was my loss. But there we are. I've got plenty of losses. But, as you asked about being in the right place at the right time. It's also being messing it all up at the right time.
I was going to say,
what should have been the right time.
I mean, you're so well known for radio, on Radio Nottingham, being such a part of that for so long. That must be quite satisfying to know that you've been such a huge part of Nottingham's legacy, Radio Nottingham's legacy for the local area.
And Radio Derby's as well.
Right.
Because when I was in Derby, the Derby Evening Telegraph, as it was then, had a banner headline calling me the voice of Derby, which was something else.
Yeah.
So I was, if anything, I mean, I've been highly successful in Nottingham, but Derby was the big one. I mean, it was just unbelievable. I mean, my mid-morning program was getting a bigger audience than breakfast, which is very unusual.
Wow.
So they're both satisfying. I just love working close to people, and Derby, we can get very close. With Nottingham, they're just as nice, but it's not quite so village atmosphere, let's put it that way.
Right. And the other thing I was going to ask you about, because of your time involved in all the music programmes, I know that you have a lot of tapes and things from that time that was perhaps never on air. And you're starting to share those in like a podcast series with your son called Fragments of Rock, aren't you?
That's right. It happened because Mark said to me one day, would get that record out by the Cramps. It's a punk band, or American punk band. So I got it out and he said, tell me about it. And I said, well, this is the Cramps. And the Cramps came to Nottingham and I interviewed them. And they appeared at Rushcliffe Leisure Centre, believe it or not, with the police, support with the police, who were then unknown also.
Yeah.
And I did all the stuff about the band and how they signed the album and all that. And he said, well, you should do this more. We should do this more. Going into records and talking about them. I said, better still, I've got loads of the old interviews. And so I've got, for instance, on that Fragments of Rock, there's Mark Bolan talking just after Ride a White Swan was a hit, and before the next one, I can't remember what it was called, that was just coming out. So I've got an interview with him, very young Mark Bolan, who he told me his ambition was to get a white horse and go around the country as a troubadour, and he would have a guitar and amplifier which didn't need electric. And I'm thinking, in your dreams. And of course you can do that now. So it wasn't in his dreams. I've got interview with Eno when he left first, was in Roxy Music, because we had Roxy Music on the programme. Oh, Rick Wakeman. I'm trying to think who else we've got. Away from that, I got a lovely interview with Brian Clough that's on there. And we've got lots more to put on, like with the Beach Boys, Might Love. I can't remember. Yeah. So there's lots and lots of people I've interviewed. Yeah. So we're totally putting them on.
That's brilliant. So if anyone's into that, into the music of that kind of era, then keep checking on Fragments of Rock for the new clip.
Another way in is via the website johnholmes.co.uk. Johnholmes.co.uk.
Because I know now Mark, well, it was one of your children, I can't remember if it was Mark or not, wasn't in such good books though when they were little, because
Rebecca,
issue with some tapes, wasn't there?
Yeah, my second series, one of the series of I used to do a hobbies-based program called Spare Time, and I had them all on tape and on VHS rather, and with it covered over with sellotape so they wouldn't touch it. And without sellotape on. I took the tab out, so she covered it over with sellotape. And when I went to show my friends, I said, I've never seen this video, but these are some of the things I did for Spare Time. It started with me going hello, and then went straight into Dallas. So I wasn't best pleased. But fortunately, on Look Here, they did. One of the technicians said to me, "We've got the whole series. That's the one with people like Selector and Specials on. Here in pristine condition. Let me rattle you off a copy." I thought, that's really nice. So I've got the whole series on VHS, and it's obviously straight out the studio, not off the television. And then British Film Institute got in touch with me and said, "You don't by chance happen to have it?" And I said yes. And so they transposed all the stuff, which is very good quality. And so it's down at the British Film Institute, and I had to on New Year's Day, I think, actually do a pull together along the South Bank of talking about Look Here. And there it was, this program I'd worked on so many decades before on a big screen with fabulous sound. Wow. Oh, it was a wonderful moment. I was so proud. But most of that stuff was chucked away. It was chucked in a skip. London threw away a lot of the stuff because they said, it's only Birmingham. Seriously, they did. And the rest of it was chucked on a skip along with all the other programs. And just one of my Spare Time programs was saved because it was on top of the skip and wasn't underwater.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So the local radio, local TV wasn't always held in, a very good light down in BBC Central, as it were.
Well, there was a slogan which was meant well. It said, "There is one BBC," and I used to say yes, and it's in London. It's now in Salford as well.
Yes, I was going to say there is a move to Media City, isn't there? Yes. Yeah.
So I must go and visit one day.
They do seem to be getting about a bit more at the moment, casting some of the big programmes from different areas.
That's right, yeah.
One last thing, because I'm aware of time, because I think we have to finish a little bit before 3:00.
Yes.
So we've got time to sort of finish off and
then for
the next one. Have you ever interviewed, either radio or TV, a musical hero or idol, or worked with someone who you had that real kind of fanboy moment? You're like, I can't believe I'm doing this.
Spike Milligan.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I used to listen to Goon Show thanks to a school friend of mine who put me onto it, and I've always thought he was brilliant. I knew he was, he had his moments, but I was doing Down Your Way, and I decided to have Spike on, and we did Down Your Way in Bexhill-on-Sea, because that was where he was an army recruit and a trainee, and we did it in Bexhill, and it was just he wasn't easy to work with, but my goodness, I loved him. And we had such a good time. And he told lots of jokes, and it was that was a good moment. He wasn't the easiest person to work with, but I tackled him and sorted him out, and we had a good program out of it. Down Your Way, Bexhill-on-Sea with Spike Milligan.
And what would you say is kind of the biggest lesson you've learned in everything that you've done in the BBC? What's the biggest lesson you've taken away from your broadcasting time?
Just like people and listen. I don't think enough presenters listen. They seem to have they seem to have all their questions in front of them, and they're determined to do the questions. What you have to do is listen. It's very scary at first, because when you haven't done interviews much, you have to keep looking down. What's the next question? What's the next question? You're not listening to what they're saying. You must listen to what they say, because they may take you down an avenue where you didn't expect to go, but it may bear better fruit than the avenue you'd chosen. So that's what I've learned. Listen.
I think that's really important, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, to bring us kind of full circle and back to middleway words, to steal a line from the League of Gentlemen, it's kind of like...
I've interviewed them.
Well, I was going to say, it's kind of like local festivals for local people.
That's it, yes.
You're a case in point, being at the Derby Festival today. Hopefully you've seen lots of people, getting interested in books. How important do you feel that these kind of local festivals are when we're talking about all things bookish, whether it's actually physical books or publishing or typesetting or interpreters? What's your feelings on it being a local festival?
People like national things, international things, but they also like the feeling of local. I mean, at this stalls, the people come up to me and say, "Are you local?" And it was important to them to know, yes, I live locally, which is great. I think people appreciate it. And the walks, the walks were all local walks. And people still come up to me and say, "Why we do more walks on the television? We want this sort of local thing." So there is a hunger for things that are local as well as national and international. And I think thank goodness. And I think things like a local book festival and Middleway Words Book Festival is so important. I'm doing another thing, Waterstones on Thursday with local authors, again for the festival.
Yes.
Yeah.
I must admit, it's being a writer is often. I'm speaking from a writer's perspective, but it's quite lonely while you're working on your books. But then to know that there's this kind of supportive network of people who understand what you're going through when you're trying to write and get your book out there, because I know you took a bit of time working on it, didn't you?
Yeah. It's true about the local support. I tell you, some people said, who most people show most interest in your book, and an enormous amount of interest has come from people I've supported in the past, writers I've supported in the past locally, and now they're supporting me. It's a brotherhood and sisterhood. Really. Yes,
it is.
Which is lovely.
It is. And you know what? On that note, I'm aware it's 5-3. I'm sure Ignati will jump in and tell me differently if he wants us to carry on a little longer. But I think on that's a really lovely kind of image to finish on, that Middleway Words is like a brother, a sisterhood, a community of writers, in the same way that over the years you've been supporting local radio, local television.
Yeah, I hope so. Yes, I think so. Middleway Words certainly is. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing your anecdotes and your stories. It's been a pleasure to chat to you again.
You are so easy to talk to. It's a delight. I just wish that I was in Vision, but things just conspired against me. I got it all working earlier. It was all working perfectly here, and something's gone wrong.
Not to worry. You were still here and still able to share, and that's what matters.
Oh, thank you.
So thank you to everyone who's joined to listen into that. Don't forget that you can still book your event tickets for anything else for Middleway Word in person, because you've obviously got the online tickets. But yeah, if you still want to listen into some of those tete-a-tetes, check out the website and the programme. And we look forward to welcoming you all to another event soon. So
absolutely.
For now, I'm going to say goodbye.
Thanks, Katherine. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thanks ever so much, John. Bye.
Well, I can see you now. Looking at you.